Okay, so ready to dive in. You've really given us a fascinating challenge this time, focusing on Bob Camblin and his painting Anonymous. You've given us a lot to unpack. We've got this YouTube video transcript, some direct quotes from Camblin himself, a bit about his life, and then some excerpts from books that look at his art more broadly.
Sounds like we've got our work cut out for us. I have to say, even just glancing at the materials, Camlin seems like a fascinating character, someone who liked to keep people guessing.
Definitely. So before we go too far, let's set the stage for our listeners. The painting, Anonymous, it's striking. And as you see in the video, it kind of messes with your expectations a little bit. It's a face, kind of, but not one you would recognize.
Right, it's this oval shape, and it's intense, that's for sure. But there are no features, no eyes, nose, mouth. It's like a blank slate. But somehow, it still feels like this collective gaze staring right at you.
Exactly. And the way he uses lines or these vivid colors, it almost feels chaotic, but it totally draws you in. You can't look away.
The video transcript really captures that feeling of unease, that something isn't quite right because you expect to see a face, and it's just not there.
And then, to make things even more interesting, right there in the middle of the forehead where you'd expect to see eyes, are these two miniature self-portraits of the artist.
So tiny, almost hidden. I mean, it's this bold statement of anonymity, but then he puts these little "I was here" markers right in the middle of it all. It makes you wonder about, how we see ourselves, the faces we show the world, the ones we keep hidden.
Totally. The video even mentions uh, Zen ideas of identity and non-identity, kind of playing with the idea that we're both present there in those little portraits and absent in this formless face.
Yeah.
And that maybe, just maybe, the idea of the self, the way we usually think about it, might be a bit of an illusion.
Yeah, it's like Camlin is using the painting to wrestle with these really big philosophical questions visually. I mean, he's got this facelessness, this non-self, but then he asserts himself, his own individuality, through those little portraits. It's almost like a visual kusan, one of those Zen riddles that's designed to kind of short-circuit your brain and make you think differently.
And to add even more to that philosophical mix, the video brings up the I Ching, specifically the hexagram, the abysmal, which, for those who don't know, is this ancient Chinese text that looks at the nature of change and how everything's connected.
The abysmal, that's a powerful image. And it really fits with the feeling you get from the painting. There's this depth, something hidden, maybe even a bit dangerous, but also this invitation to explore that unknown part of yourself.
Right, and the video interprets those self-portraits, those tiny little faces, as almost like guardians at the entrance to this inner world. What do you think about that?
I like that idea. It adds another layer to how we might think about the relationship between the artist and the painting, almost like he's protecting that inner space, or maybe even challenging the viewer to go deeper, to confront what they find there.
So we've got Zen and the I Ching, and then the video also connects the painting to Lao Tzu and the Tao Te Ching, this idea that the Tao, that fundamental energy of the universe, it doesn't reveal itself directly, just like the faceless figure in the painting. It's about recognizing the potential in emptiness and going with the flow.
And again, we see that idea of duality that's so central to Taoism reflected in the painting, the personal represented by those little self-portraits existing within this impersonal, formless void.
The video transcript also brings up existentialism and how Anonymous could be seen as a meditation on, what it means to exist, to be an individual in this huge, often indifferent universe. It's about vulnerability and authenticity, putting something of yourself out there, but also keeping part of yourself hidden.
And the painting captures that tension so well, doesn't it? That struggle to figure out who we are when the world doesn't really offer any easy answers.
And finally, there's a parallel drawn to Rembrandt's self-portraits, that intense introspective gaze. It suggests that Camblin, in his own way, is inviting us to look inward, to find something of ourselves in this unknown face, maybe even question who we are when you strip away all those external labels we usually wear.
Fascinating. So we've got this incredibly layered painting. Now I think it's time to move on and look at what Camblin himself had to say about art. You've got a whole collection of his quotes here, and they really offer some interesting insights into his worldview.
Okay, so let's see. He says, I believe in common sense and the perfectly average, then the miraculous and the magic of science, or better put, magic, a bright gray. What do you make of that?
There's a lot to unpack there. He seems to be advocating for a kind of balanced perspective, finding that middle ground between what we consider rational and the things we might call mystical. That bright gray is a really interesting way to put it.
He also says, sixth sense is to be without a doubt. Pretty definitive. And then there's this one, which I love. Find something in nature that completes you, and surrender to it.
It sounds like he was deeply connected to nature and intuition, and that sixth sense, quote, it really suggests he trusted those gut feelings, that kind
Yeah.
of knowing that goes beyond logic.
Yeah, he talks a lot about belief and how it can make things happen. Belief puts power in your actions, patience for freedom. And he seems to see art as more than just making images. It's about life, personal growth, even survival. Art for images, for life, for your sake, for survival.
That's powerful. It elevates art beyond something decorative, something pretty to look at. It becomes an essential part of being human.
Here's one that caught my eye. Step off the train of thought and enjoy a real laugh. I believe that the cosmos has a direct interaction with the individual, which sees the world through nature.
I like that. It reminds me of that Zen idea of quieting the mind, letting go of all those constant thoughts and anxieties. And he's definitely echoing that interconnectedness we talked about earlier, that we're all part of this larger system.
And then there's this quote that seems particularly relevant to Anonymous, where he says, I am a hologram, and the more people come together, the clearer the picture.
The hologram analogy, that's brilliant, especially in the context of Anonymous. It suggests that we each hold a fragment of something larger, and it's only through connection, through coming together, that the whole image becomes clear.
And he talks about participatory art, which I think ties into that idea of the viewer being an active participant in the experience, not just a passive observer. What do you think he meant by that?
I think he wanted his art to engage people on multiple levels, to spark something in them, maybe even a dialogue, rather than just presenting them with a finished product to admire from a distance.
Okay, here's another one that I think gets at the heart of his artistic philosophy. To believe is one thing, to know is another. The mystics have a different kind of knowledge. He also talks about that balance between intuition and logic. Intuition versus logic. Which is the better half?
Right. He seems to be saying that there's more than one way of knowing, and that maybe sometimes we lose something when we try to overanalyze and explain everything.
He's got a lot to say about the process of creating art. In the process, be aware. Failure is just another experience. And then this one really struck me. Everyone is a mirror, which is magic in itself.
That idea of mirroring, it speaks to that deep interconnectedness we keep coming back to. And the idea that true magic might lie in seeing the world reflected back at us through other people.
He even talks about different kinds of magic. Magic for seeing or for power. And then this one, which really resonated with me.
Yeah.
See for real is to be in a whirlpool of relationships.
I love that image of the whirlpool. It suggests that genuine seeing, really understanding something or someone, is a dynamic process, constantly shifting and changing as we bring our own experiences and perspectives into the mix.
He also talks about the challenges artists face. Disposable art culture, new and faster versus technique and depth. Is anonymity freedom? That feels pretty relevant to Anonymous. And then he says, the symbolists were right. If you explained it, you killed it.
I think a lot of artists today can relate to that struggle, that pressure to constantly produce something new and trendy. And the symbolist idea, it really speaks to the power of suggestion, leaving space for individual interpretation, which is definitely something that Camblin embraces in Anonymous.
Here are a couple more that I found really thought-provoking. The best communications can't say it all. You have to be there. And then there are no mistakes, only learning. And I love this one. Don't be possessed by the demon of being right. Go with the flow. He also talks about the importance of a naive approach, like a child. We must return to the naive, leave art history and the critics alone.
That's a great reminder for all of us, no matter what we do. It's about staying curious, open to new possibilities, and not letting the fear of being wrong stifle our creativity.
A few more. The aimless mind focuses itself in zazen. I wonder if he's connecting that to the experience of looking at Anonymous, that kind of meditative quality it has.
I think it's a great parallel, that idea of letting go of the constant chatter of the mind and allowing for a more contemplative experience.
And then he ends with this one. Learn not to look, but to see. Success is only another failure in the making. It seems like he's really emphasizing that art, and maybe even life itself, is this ongoing process of learning and discovery.
Exactly. There's no end point, no final destination. It's about being present in the moment, embracing the journey, and always being open to new possibilities, new ways of seeing.
Okay, so we've got Camblin's own words to work with, and I think they really give us a much deeper understanding of what might be going on in Anonymous.
Absolutely. His emphasis on that fluidity of self, the importance of intuition, the idea that there's more than one way of knowing, that really resonates with that central paradox of the painting, the faceless figure that somehow contains the artist's own presence.
Now let's add a bit of biographical context to the mix. Camblin was born in Oklahoma in 1928, and he went on to study art at the Kansas City Art Institute. He even earned a Fulbright to study in Italy.
That's a pretty impressive start. That kind of training, plus the experience of living in Italy, would have exposed him to such a wide range of artistic traditions and ideas.
Right, and he went on to teach art at a number of universities, including Rice University here in Houston. But then in 1976, he made this pretty radical decision to become a nomadic artist, traveling all over the place.
I wonder what prompted that shift. It seems like a pretty big change, going from the stability of academia to a life on the road.
It makes you wonder if he felt a need to break free from those structures, maybe even to explore his own ideas about identity and experience in a more direct way. The book we have focuses on his drawings and writings from 1950 to 1974, so Anonymous was created before he went nomadic.
So we're seeing a snapshot of his thinking during a particular period of his life. It would be interesting to see how his work might have evolved after he made that decision to travel.
Totally. The material also mentions some of his early influences growing up in Ponca City, Oklahoma, the Marland Estate, the Pioneer Woman statue, even the Wizard of Oz.
That's an interesting mix. You've got this grandeur of the Marland Estate, this iconic image of the pioneer woman, and then the fantastical world of Oz.
He was also drawn to the writings of Ralph Waldo Emerson, the wisdom of the I Ching, and the concise beauty of haiku and haiga.
It sounds like he was really open to drawing inspiration from a lot of different sources, both Eastern and Western, philosophical and artistic.
His time in Italy also seems to have had a profound impact on him, particularly his visits to the Uffizi Gallery with all those Renaissance masterpieces and the Catacombe dei Cappuccini.
That's quite a contrast. The beauty and idealism of the Renaissance, and then the stark reality of the catacombs where they used to bury the Capuchin monks. It must have been a pretty powerful experience.
And it seems like he was really drawn to the idea of collaboration and submerging the ego in the creative process. He even signed some of his works as anonymous, which, again, ties right back to the painting we're discussing.
It suggests a real humility, a willingness to let go of the need for individual recognition and focus on the art itself.
Now let's look at what some critics had to say about his work. Charlotte Moser noted that his style shifted from intricate, detailed drawings to more organic, flowing forms.
That makes sense, considering what we know about his interest in Zen and those ideas of impermanence and the flow of energy.
Eleanor Freed pointed out his fascination with the life cycle and the idea of metamorphosis.
Again, that ties into the themes we've been discussing about identity and change, how nothing stays the same.
Texas Overview praised his innovative use of drawing and watercolor techniques. And apparently, he even pioneered a style called mousses volantes, which involved creating these optical illusion effects with his collaborator, Nancy Giordano.
It sounds like he was always experimenting, pushing the boundaries of his art, and finding new ways to engage viewers.
And many critics noted that his work seemed to transcend traditional art criticism and commercial pressures, aiming to connect with viewers on a more personal, almost spiritual level. So do you think his nomadic period, his interest in collaboration and anonymity, and these critical interpretations of his other works shed any light on Anonymous?
I think it all reinforces this idea that he was deeply interested in the question of what it means to be an individual, both in the context of the larger world and in the context of art itself. The faceless figure in Anonymous could be seen as representing this universal aspect of being, while those tiny self-portraits are like little reminders that the individual is always present within that larger whole.
Let's shift gears a bit and talk about this book, Zen and the Art of Enlightenment, which, get this, uses Camblin's drawings as Zen koans.
Okay, that's fascinating. So for those who might not be familiar with Zen, a koan is basically a riddle or statement that's designed to kind of break your brain a little bit. They don't have logical answers. They're meant to make you think in a different way.
Right. And the book suggests that Camblin's art can lead to this everyday enlightenment by helping us see beauty in unexpected places and accept the fact that everything is constantly changing. It sees his art as an invitation to look inward, to question our usual ways of perceiving the world.
It sounds like they're saying that engaging with his work can be a kind of meditative practice, a way to quiet the mind and open yourself up to new possibilities.
Exactly. And the foreword, written by Lewis Casey, talks about how different art movements, from realism to abstract expressionism, actually resonate with the principles of Zen and the I Ching, particularly the emphasis on intuition, interconnectedness, and constant change.
So he's drawing these connections between what might seem like very different approaches to art and thought, and showing how they're all ultimately exploring similar themes.
He also talks about how art can be a kind of portal to a higher state of awareness, leading to self-inquiry and deeper understanding. He calls the act of looking at art an acastic dialogue, a conversation between the viewer and the artwork, where the artwork is more like a metaphor than a set of instructions.
So it's not just about passively observing the art, it's about actively engaging with it, letting it challenge you, and bringing your own experiences and interpretations to the table.
So, thinking about all that, the Korean idea, this search for everyday enlightenment, the invitation for self-inquiry, how does that resonate with your experience of Anonymous?
It makes me see the painting as less about a specific person or identity and more about those larger questions of what it means to be human, to exist in a world that's constantly changing. The fact that it doesn't give you easy answers, that makes you work a little bit to figure out what's going on, I think that's part of its power.
We also have a bunch of excerpts from various reviews of Camblin's work. Pete Gershon described him as a mystical trickster figure, which I think is a great description.
Definitely. There's a playfulness in his work, but also a depth, a sense that he's not taking himself too seriously, but he's also dealing with some pretty big ideas.
George O. Jackson Jr. felt his art was a portal into truly experiencing art, a distillation of art.
That idea of a portal, it echoes that Zen and the art of enlightenment perspective, suggesting that his art can transport you to a different level of understanding, a more direct experience of art's essence.
Earl Staley, who was a friend and collaborator of Camblin's, talked about his collaborative spirit and the things he learned from him.
It sounds like he had a real gift for connecting with people and inspiring them creatively.
Penny Serling noted his inherently questioning nature, always pushing boundaries and challenging assumptions. Carolyn Farb talked about the autobiographical elements in his work. And Roland's biography seems to strike a balance between exploring his art and his personal life.
So we get a sense of a complex individual, someone who is deeply engaged with the world, both intellectually and emotionally, and who wasn't afraid to explore those complexities in his art.
And Earl Staley shared a really interesting story about Camblin returning to Houston shortly before his death. He apparently felt very uncomfortable with his past and ended up disappearing again pretty quickly, which just adds to this air of mystery surrounding him.
He really seemed to value his privacy and that freedom to move through the world without being tied down by expectations or labels.
Staley also mentioned that they collaborated under the name B&E Productions for a while, but later Camblin became more solitary. And get this, he was known for giving his art away. What do you make of that?
It's an interesting gesture, isn't it? It almost feels like a rejection of the traditional art world, with its emphasis on ownership and commercial value. Maybe it was his way of saying that art should be shared freely, or maybe it was another expression of his desire to remain anonymous, to let the work speak for itself without being tied to his name.
Okay, so as we wrap things up, it's clear that Anonymous is much more than just a portrait. It's a really complex, multi-layered work that reflects Camblin's fascination with the nature of identity, how we perceive ourselves and the world around us, and those big philosophical questions about what it means to be human. It draws on Eastern and Western philosophy, his personal experiences, and this constant drive to push boundaries and explore new ways of seeing.
Absolutely. That central paradox of the painting, the faceless figure with the artist's own image hidden within it, it really gets to the heart of those questions about who we are, how much we choose to reveal, and what parts of ourselves remain hidden, even from ourselves.
And everything we've learned about Camblin, his own words, the details of his life, the critical perspectives on his work, it all points to this incredibly independent spirit. Someone who was committed to creating art that challenged viewers, made them think, and maybe even led to some kind of personal transformation.
It's been a fascinating journey into the world of Bob Camblin, and I have to say, Anonymous is a painting that stays with you. It makes you question, it makes you wonder, and it keeps revealing new layers of meaning the more you think about it.
Exactly. And we hope that this deep dive has given our listeners a new way to approach this painting, to appreciate its complexities, and maybe even to see a little bit of themselves reflected in that anonymous face. So, as a final thought, I want to leave our listeners with this question. Thinking about Camblin's embrace of anonymity and that faceless figure at the center of the painting, what aspects of your own identity feel most essential to who you are? And conversely, what aspects might you choose to shed or maybe even deliberately keep hidden as you move through the world? It's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Until next time.